Welcome to the Midlife Manifesto, where we are embracing the twists and turns and transformations of midlife. I am Arlene Scholten, your host and fellow traveler on this crazy journey. So if you're looking to reinvent yourself, rediscover your passions, or just make sense of this beautifully messy phase of your life, you're in the right place. I will be interviewing experts on a number of different topics, anything midlife, whether it be your health, wellness, perimenopause, relationships, rediscovering yourself, new adventures, career shifts, raising teenagers, you name it. We're going to discuss it all right here. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's get real about midlife, because it's more than a phase. It's our time to thrive. We can do this together, so join me on my journey. It's crazy, but let's make it some fun. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast of the Midlife Manifesto, where we are redefining aging and talking about all things midlife and aging. And today, I'm very excited to have our guest with us, Clare Young. She's going to be talking to us about the importance of wills and trusts and everything else that we need to know at this stage of our life, probably earlier. But for those of you that don't have a will, we are going to dive in today and talk all things wills and trusts and everything else you're going to teach us today, Clare. So Clare has worked as an experienced wills and estate planning solicitor for 25 years, helping people to put their affairs in order and make sure their loved ones benefit in the most tax efficient and protected way. Having spent her career working for high regarded legal firms in London and the Southwest, Clare now works as an independent consultant for legal studio solicitors, specializing in advising high net worth individuals in relation to their often complex personal and financial affairs. Clare has significant experience of looking after business owners in particular, helping them to navigate through the challenges of protecting their business's interests while also ensuring that their personal matters are in good shape. Clare has recently established her own will writing and estate planning business called Hambleton Wills to offer a more reassuring service to clients in an increasingly flooded and under-regulated marketplace. Specifically, Clare's areas of expertise include writing wills and lasting powers of attorney, advising about trusts and inheritance tax planning, as well as guiding people through the ways in which to protect themselves when buying property with others, getting married or cohabitating, and or separating or divorcing. Clare can also guide people through the process of deceased estate administration and possible future planning opportunities following death, which can mean significant tax savings for the family. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Loaded bio.
There's a lot there. It all sounds a bit
a lot there. Because you know what you're talking about. So I met you at a networking event and you spoke actually at Grantley Hall for the Women's Wealth and Wellbeing, which was really interesting. And I am one of those people that have kind of a half will, if you like. And it's one of those things, like you say, it's on the top of your to-do list, but never gets done.
Yeah.
Partly because it's a bit uncomfortable, partly because we have children, we don't know where to leave them. And so actually having a conversation with you was really interesting, and became quite apparent that a lot of people actually in midlife don't have wills, or they were written years and years ago and they haven't been updated.
Yeah, I mean, this affects all of us, doesn't it? You know, I know a lot of people that I meet, younger people as well. It's not just a certain time of your life. Younger people are saying, well, I don't need one. It's not relevant for me. But actually, it really is. You know, if you have young children, it's already relevant for you, you know, in terms of guardianship and what's going to happen to them. It can be a bit of a difficult conversation because of some of those what if scenarios we have to chat about, but it's far better to take control of that, in my opinion, than not. So yeah, thank you. It's great to have the opportunity to talk about it more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think talk about it in almost like more of a positive. I think everyone that was talking about kind of end of life and wills, it would become everyone kept apologizing. And I thought, you know, there's two certainties in life. One is death, one is taxes, isn't it? So
absolutely. And I don't know, I certainly try and make this a more positive experience, because in my mind, at the end of this, what I want people to feel like is that their shoulders are dropped. They can go to bed at night and, you know, not have that 3 a.m. wake up where you think, oh my God, you know, what's going to happen if the following set of circumstances happen, or we, you know, we're getting on a plane on Saturday to take our whole family on holiday, you know, what's going to happen if? And that's the question, really, because we all have those moments and it's not comfortable. And, you know, I, in relation to certain aspects of my life, stick my head firmly in the sand. I will think about it at another point, you know, but actually there's a lot of power to be taken from having control over this and getting to grips with it. And I think it feels really good. I also try and make this quite a positive, relaxed experience for people, because I'm very conscious of the difficulty of the subject matter. It's sensitive stuff, you know, and it can be really difficult. And also I'm conscious that I get to learn some quite personal information about people. You know, I'm quite in that respect. I have to sort of hear it all, you know, warts and all. I need to know if there's difficulties and problems, because I can then present a solution to that, which is the positive aspect. But also try and keep it quite light. You know, if we
Yeah.
can have a giggle, we're going to have a giggle, because it's heavy stuff, and
Yeah.
that's my personality, I think. And you know, I'm not stuffy in that respect. I think people need to be in an environment where they can feel free to discuss quite difficult things, you know.
Yeah, you're anything but stuffy, which is one of the reasons I wanted you on here. One of the interesting things when I was reading a little bit more about wills and on your website as well is actually I didn't realize it's an unregulated industry.
Yeah, that's
And so I
interesting.
think that sets you apart from I don't know if it's many or most. I don't know how that is, but I guess if anyone gets in touch with Claire after today, you know, you are regulated and registered. So I think that's
So
important to know.
anybody can write a will. Everybody can write a will, and in some
Yeah.
respects, that's quite a positive thing.
Yeah.
So you can go down to WH Smith's and you can buy yourself a will pack. I think they sell them at the post office now, you know, and you can do your own. You'll have probably heard me muttering about this in the past, but I really try and persuade people not to do that, just because they're very easy to get wrong. So if you write your own will, I mean, believe it or not, if you put a comma in the wrong place, you know, if the interpretation of what you've written can be questioned, actually somebody reads it in that way, but somebody else might read it in another way. There's uncertainty about what it was that you meant. That happens all the time. And what this results in is quite expensive litigation
Yeah.
sometimes later on, once you've gone, where people are sort of fighting over the, you know, the interpretation of what you meant. And actually it can have a really different practical outcome, and people are going to fall out about it, you know. And
Yeah.
again, we sometimes have really expensive sort of court cases about this stuff. So having it properly drafted at the outset can lead to avoiding all of those rather unnecessary, difficult, emotional estate arguments, which we really need to, you know, to try and avoid if we possibly can, because I'm afraid it's the lawyers who benefit in that situation. You know, it doesn't help anyone in the family, and it can be really toxic. So yeah, homemade wills, it is an option. I advise people against it. I always
Hmm.
look at them for people, you know, if they've made one, people sort of shuffle up to me sideways and whisper about the fact that they might have done something. You know, there's no judgment, crikey. You know, we can all have a go, especially these days when there's so many resources online.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to look at documents and tell people actually it's okay, or actually maybe it isn't. You know, we might just
Yeah.
have a look at this because, you know, there's something unexpected in there that they may not have anticipated. But yeah, you've got will writers in the marketplace who haven't necessarily had a great deal in terms of qualification. They might have taken a course or done something online. They don't need to. It's unregulated. So I like to think that me joining this marketplace is reassuring for people, because I've got
Yeah.
25 years experience as a qualified solicitor, and I still am a qualified solicitor. So you like to think you're bringing something a bit more in terms of that, you know, reassuring factor.
Well, I guess you're the one who dots the I's, crosses the T's, and put the comment in the right position so that people can interpret it properly at the end.
It's about the bigger picture, because, you know, I want to leave everything to the donkey sanctuary. And, you know, at a very basic level, you can write a will
Yeah.
leaving everything to the donkey sanctuary. But what about those children that you haven't mentioned you have? You may not have been in touch with them for 20 years, you know, because you're estranged, but
Yeah.
actually they're going to pop up, you know, and then
Yeah.
there's a big mess fighting with the donkey sanctuary and the children. You know, it's a light example, but you can take the point. You know, this
Yeah.
happens all the time. So it's the wider questions. What about inheritance tax? Have we even thought about that? You know, there's an awful lot in the conversation that needs to be
Yeah.
looked at, which sometimes basic level sort of will writing does not dive into, because what questions do we
Exactly.
ask, you know?
Well, I guess it gets a little bit more involved too now. You've got so many more blended families, so there's more members in the family. There's more children involved. There's more exes and spouses and everything else. So I mean,
Absolutely. So that traditional structure of, you know, mum and dad and 2.5 children, whatever it is, the nuclear family, you know, it does exist still, but it's much more rare these
yeah,
days. You know, the families are blended, like you say, and we may have been married a couple of times before. We may have children from previous relationships. Maybe we weren't married, but we've got children from previous relationships. And we're now in a situation where we are with a partner, and we want to make sure we provide for our current partner, but we've got children that we also need to
yeah,
make sure are our primary beneficiaries in the longer term. And so trying to balance those interests can be really challenging. I'm in a blended family as well. I always say that to people because, again, I want people to know that I understand what those
Yeah.
pressures are and what those difficult questions are. I think it can go on the too hard pile, Arlene, to be honest, and
Right.
I understand that it's too difficult. I just can't work out what to do here because it's just too hard. And there are solutions, there is a way to navigate through this, and it isn't particularly difficult, but, knowledge is power and all that, isn't it? As soon as you have
Yeah.
a conversation with someone, it can end up being a really positive outcome because guess what? There's a way that we can do it.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons when I talked to you at the break actually was interesting. I actually admitted that we don't have a it's kind of half done.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the reasons is we've got still a 10-year-old and we don't know where we would leave him if anything were to happen. And I think you just don't want to think about the possibility that you both going at the same time. But actually you kind of gave me a solution to it. And, because our daughter, so can you talk a little bit about like trusts and legal guardians and things like that? And I guess when you're in midlife, you usually have maybe a younger child, maybe a teenager as well. Our eldest is almost 19.
Yeah. Sure. Guardianship is so important, isn't it? So I have a 15-year-old, and what my experience in talking to people about this is that often the other stuff can also be quite complicated, but the guardianship issue is probably one of the hardest things. And maybe that
Yeah.
applies to you, Arlene, and your husband.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
one of the hardest things, and it's one of the things that stops people actually engaging with this process because they just can't decide. Or there are several members of the family, and there's a bit of tension between, husband and wife or a partnership, trying to decide who should be the guardians. So often my opening into that conversation is to, okay, who are they? Who are those people?
Yeah.
So often people's stumbling block is they want to name parents, but they're very conscious that parents get older as we get older, so that won't work. My answer to that, I always call it the Monday morning scenario. We have to think about this stuff in the short term. If anything were to happen on Monday morning, and if you thought you would like mum or dad or both of them, sometimes it's not quite just dad by himself, actually,
Yeah.
if it's only dad, that changes the perspective a little bit. But if they would be the right people to look after your kids, then you should name them. Absolutely, 100%, because they're the right people right now. But in the wills, we can build in sort of a tiered appointment. So actually we can have some sort of backup scenarios, if you like. So if mum can't do it, or if mum and dad can't do it, or if there's only dad, maybe again, we might think that's a bit too much to put on him. So
Yeah.
we might name them siblings. So we can have I sort of call it a waterfall appointment where we've got, 2, 3, and I think sometimes that helps people feel a bit more comfortable. We can have a letter of wishes where we say, actually, I've named so-and-so as a guardian in my will. This is how I want it to happen. So you can talk through some practicalities around that. There's always been a difficulty historically with naming people as guardians who might have a different address. Because in practical terms, how does that work? We've got one sibling on one side, one sibling on the other side. We'll name them as guardians. You can do that. But in practical terms, if you can input into how you see that actually working in real life, that's really helpful, isn't it? So, actually we've named our sister in the US and, so-and-so's brother down in London. We'd much rather so-and-so's brother takes on the day-to-day practical sort of housing of the children because they're in this country, we want them to remain here. And you can really talk through what your wishes and intentions are. I'm a huge fan of letters of wishes because you don't get any better than hearing from you about, what you want that to look like. And also with letters of wishes, you can change them, of course. So if, as the children get older and you want to maybe tweak that guardianship appointment, you can do so quite easily. They're teenagers now, they have different needs, different requirements. We might think a little differently about what their circumstances should be. And generally in the wills, you will possibly leave an age at which you would want your children to benefit in the event that anything happened to the two of you. That might be 18, it might be 21, it might be 25. So what you've got is a relationship between the guardians, the people who are feeding the children, clothing them, getting them to school, and a relationship with what we call your executors, your trustees. I use that term interchangeably. They are the people who hold the purse strings. So they're the ones who are actually going to fund all of this. So I think people often believe that their guardians are going to receive money or perhaps receive property in order to house the children. They don't actually. It's the executors of your estate, the trustees, who would look after the assets that you leave until your children reach the age at which they can inherit. But in the meantime, they can make that available to pay for things, so the guardians don't actually control that money, but they have the access to it. They will go to your trustees and say, if we're private if we're privately schooling these children, here are the school fees, and the
Yeah.
the trustees will then pay them. So it all works out very well. And sometimes those people are the same. Sometimes your
Yeah.
guardians and your trustees might be the same people. Sometimes they're different. So it's worth bearing in mind what that relationship needs to be.
Yeah.
If we are naming people who don't get on necessarily too well, we've got to have a think about that because.
Yeah. I think I've got a sister in Canada and a sister in Brazil, and then
Yeah,
an 83-year-old mother. My dad's passed away. So, for us, I would never uproot the teenagers would obviously stay here, but I would
yeah.
never uproot my 10-year-old to another country. I think that would be too traumatic.
On that point, sometimes older children, so if you have children who are over the age of 18, sometimes I've had clients who will name those children. And we're all very conscious that, the elder child may just be 19, which is still very young to be a guardian.
Yeah.
But actually, probably they would want to be involved in that role.
Yeah.
We might name someone alongside them, or we might have our letter of wishes, which says, we've named the elder child, the 19-year-old, as the guardian. We're very conscious that this is a huge responsibility. They're probably at university by that stage, they're going to need some help. So we would really call upon our family members to assist and support them, and of course that's going to happen. But there's practical housing,
Yeah.
housing sort of arrangements, but it doesn't have to be the case necessarily that the elder child is managing all of that by
Yeah.
themselves. So
Yeah.
there are ways. Also friends, Arlene,
Yeah.
friends, not acquaintances. They probably need to be more than acquaintances. You need to be friends if they're going to take on your children.
I don't think
Um,
so.
but friend groups actually, and I
Yeah.
think I mentioned to you when we met, sometimes people they may have named you without telling you about it. You don't have to tell your guardians
Right.
you're naming them as guardians. It's so there might be friends, very, very close friends where you think actually they'd be perfect. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to. The point is, it doesn't have to be a family member,
Yeah.
So there are ways of unblocking all of this. There is always a solution. It's just a case of chatting it through, isn't it, and trying to
Yeah.
find the right one.
It's actually quite relaxing talking about it, I think, because you just
Yeah.
don't. I mean, I'm only 48 and I don't expect to be gone soon, but you never know. Like I could get hit by anything, I could fall ill. You just never ever know, do you?
And it's knowing that you've got something, you've taken care of
Yeah.
it. So in the event that that happens, it's done rather than, oh God,
Yeah.
a bit sweaty, I
Yeah.
haven't thought of it and I won't think about it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you have that reaction because that's the reaction that I want people to
Yeah.
feel.
I think
Okay.
it's also because my mom's 83. She talks very openly about the fact that she is going to die at some point. I mean, she could live to 100 and she probably will.
Yeah.
But she's still in very good nick, but it could turn, but she talks so openly about, about death and, her dying wish, even though she's not dying, is that we all have one big holiday together. So we're all going away and we're meeting at my sister's in Brazil in April. And that is her wish is while she's still alive and still healthy and able to jump off the boat with her grandkids that we do that now. So, and it's quite refreshing because she goes, I'm not scared of death, and I guess it's
I love
something,
that. I love that personally. So when
yeah,
people say to me, should we talk about it with the kids and the family? I say 100%,
yeah,
if you're that family that can discuss these things, I think it's fantastic because as I said earlier, you don't get any better than hearing from mum what her wishes were. Doesn't it take out the pain a little bit of trying to
yeah,
work out what would she have wanted? What would she have wanted? You know exactly what she wanted. She wanted this
yeah.
great holiday. And I think there's a lot of joy to be had in,
Mm,
you know, manifesting all that stuff when the time comes. There's
yeah,
a lot of pleasure, but also it can avoid any difficult questions. When families don't discuss this openly, and I completely accept that happens a lot because it's one
yeah,
of those things. Sometimes families just aren't of that mind frame, but when they don't discuss it, I think it can create some uncertainty.
yeah,
There's sort of often a bit of a what's the word? A bit of yeah, uncertainty is the right word amongst the family. Siblings maybe wondering what have mum and dad done? Are we taken care of? Actually there's a new partner up there, so mum died and dad's shacked up with somebody. What does that
yeah, yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And we've all read those stories, we've all heard those stories. I see
yeah,
them all the time. Um, when there's no discussion about it and no openness, then it can mean that there can be problems,
yeah,
difficulties before people have even passed away.
yeah,
When you discuss things, actually, then it's a learning opportunity. So actually, Dad, you really need to get things sorted out. Dad didn't realize. Dad just assumed that his natural kids would benefit. They don't,
yeah,
especially not if the partner then marries Dad. So
yeah,
all of that just can be more healthily discussed in an open family environment than when things are a bit shut down. But it's
yeah.
idealistic, really.
It's interesting. I just ran into a friend at school and her husband's father isn't very well. And I guess we were kind of just talking about things, and she was like, he was, talking about leaving money, and it's like, we don't want his money. And it's like, but if we put ourselves in that position, I don't want my money to go anywhere but my children. So I think we were talking before we pushed record, and you were saying, you can sometimes feel greedy and when you talk about this subject. But at the end of the day, if I fast forward my life, I want whatever I've earned. I want as little to go to the tax man because I've already paid tax on everything. And I want as much to go to my children so they can either use it for their kids or for themselves if they're, business or paying off their mortgage or whatever they want to use it for.
That's the pleasure, and you're not alone.
Yeah.
And guess what? We all want exactly that thing.
Yeah.
Some of us feel differently about the tax man. That's quite interesting. Some of us are, every now and again, I have clients who are very relaxed about the tax man and say, so be it. It is what it is, But on the whole, the most of us really want things to go in the direction that we intended. And sometimes, I get approached a lot by adult children of, elderly parents, and there's often a reluctance. They sort of feel a bit grabby, as we were speaking about earlier, maybe a bit greedy. And I always try and reassure people, you're doing the right thing actually by helping mum and dad have this conversation, because again, maybe they've made some assumptions about what will happen, or I don't have a will, but it's all going to be fine because I've got children, they'll just get everything. These assumptions can be really problematic because quite often they're not correct. So, navigating mum and dad towards taking some advice, which is independent, I can be guided by adult children, but ultimately I need to make sure that it's mum and dad who are asking me what they want to do or telling me what they want to do, and then I will implement that. And we've got to work quite hard as practitioners, actually, as professional people, to make sure that these instructions are coming from mum and dad. But yeah, it's control. It's implementing what they wanted. And again, sometimes people don't quite realise that they need a document. You have to have a document. You can't just assume this will happen. So yeah, never feel needy, never feel grabby. Sometimes untoward things happen. Again, we've all read about the stories. There can be some maneuvering of mum and dad into a certain situation, but a good professional will take a lot of steps and a belt and braces approach to make sure that there is no undue influence. Mum and dad are not being forced into a situation where they're having to agree to something or sign something. It does happen from time to time, but there should be safeguards in place to protect that.
But we've all heard those stories, and it can sometimes get a bit messy with families, I think, when wills are a bit messy. And I guess that's the importance of having a dot the I's, cross the T's, and put the comma in the right place, because when somebody dies, if somebody does go a bit odd, because money can make people go a bit odd when you hear the stories and you think, gosh, I would have never foreseen that. But I guess it just cleans everything up. It keeps it clean.
And before people pass away, if they are incapacitated in some way, which may be old age mental incapacity, or it may be sort of physical incapacity, there is the opportunity for abuse in terms of financial abuse, mismanagement of funds while people are still here. So they haven't passed away yet, and their wills may be in great shape, but they're here and now. And sometimes there's an opportunity for people to be taken advantage of. So I talk a lot with people about powers of attorney. They're called lasting powers of attorney, which are these lifetime documents which enable family members, whoever the person who is making the power would like to appoint, to basically stand in their shoes and assist, make decisions on their behalf if need be, look after financial affairs if needed. Two types of powers of attorney. There's a financial one, which is a no-brainer. I love that expression because it speaks a lot. It's just a good idea, and it's a good idea for all of us, Arlene, to be honest. These are not old age documents. I recite this in my sleep. It's not an old age document. We don't know what's around the corner. COVID happened, and many of us found ourselves unexpectedly on a ventilator for 6 weeks, and thinking we were previously fit and well. I mean, things like that are quite an eye-opener. So these powers of attorney are really, really useful to try and guard against that. So financial powers enable family members, the people that you trust, the people that you probably named in your will, want to name in your will as your executors, to help you look after things at home. So pay the bills, maybe sell the property if they need to on your behalf. They can stand in your shoes and do all of that for you. With a financial power of attorney, so long as you are able to make those decisions yourself and look after your money, then you will do it. But if there comes a point where, I don't know, maybe you've suffered a stroke, or there's some physical reason why you're finding it hard to sign the checks. Do people sign checks anymore?
I don't know. I don't think so. I
Jotted a checkbook somewhere in this house. Or have a conversation with BT. Absolutely soul destroying, isn't it, to ring up a utility company and spend half an hour trying to just get something done. For mum and dad in their 70s or their 80s, that's really, really difficult these days. Power of attorney means that, the children can ring up and try and sort it out, whatever's going on with the Wi-Fi. They can manage all of that. They can speak to pension providers. They can take care of attendance allowance claims and things like that. Good idea, just hands down a good idea. On the other side of the coin, there's the health and welfare power, which is all about your medical treatment, your care, where you should be looked after. Now, that arguably is a more later life document, isn't it? Because, actually, when we are mentally incapacitated, that's probably because we are later in our years, And the point with those types of powers of attorney are that so long as you are okay, you're able to make those decisions, then the doctors, the medical team will be speaking to you, of course. So there's no scope for abuse there. But if you tip over into that, and it's never black and white, is it? If you tip over into that side of the page which suggests that you maybe are no longer capable of making those decisions, then actually this document is worth its weight in gold, because your family are then able to speak to the doctors. It's quite subtle, actually, but sometimes doctors have their own plan about how they want to treat you, and if that conflicts with what the family think and what you might have wanted, these powers of attorney will enable the family to be able to effectively instruct the doctors as to what that care should look like. So it prevents any sort of conflict. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes there can be a bit of conflict there between family members trying to implement mum or dad's wishes and the medical team. Sorry, I was just pausing there because we always have a bit of a giggle with clients about the kids switching off the machine a bit too soon. And the amount of times people sort of have a little laugh about it between themselves. I think this is a real serious concern. But actually giving the family the power to be able to look after you. My mother has Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed about 2 or 3 years ago, and this is what I do for a living. And it was still quite late in the day when I managed to get a power of attorney sorted out. But it has been an absolute godsend. And it's really interesting being on this side of the fence. I say, talking to people about powers of attorney and helping them put them in place. Being on the side of the fence of being the family member, needing the power of attorney, liaising with people, medical team, and financial organizations. Goodness me, it was so useful. They ask you the question, have you got a power of attorney? I say yes, and they say that's great, off we go. All obstacles are removed. So they are so useful. So I'd encourage everyone to not just think about your wills, but also think about the lifetime powers of attorney. Well,
it's almost like when you had your daughter, you had a birth plan. And I think it's like I've always said to my kids, like, obviously they're not allowed to turn the machine off because they'd be in prison. But I mean, is there anything else? Like I don't want to live like that. And I think this is also an interesting conversation, is that we decide now, once we're well healthy, how we want to live our lives. If I'm on a machine, I don't even want to go into care home. Like I do not want to work to save money for my kids, for them to take it all away. Because that's exactly what happens if you save, isn't it? They take and they take and take until it's drained.
Yeah, it is. And people feel differently about this. It's a bit like the tax. Some people feel, look, we've worked hard all our lives. If our money ends up, being spent down on care for us in our later years, so be it. But actually, most people are further up the scale than that. Actually, we have worked hard all our lives. Yes, there's an element of this money being, available to look after us in later years, but we'd really, really like at least some of it to be preserved for the next generation.
And I think it's just choice. Some people are quite happy going into care homes. Some people they want to put their parents into care homes because it's the best option for them. I do not want to be put in a care home. One, I just don't want to. It's my choice. And two, I don't want my inheritance that I want to pass on to my kids to be, because what's the average care home cost? It's insane.
Astronomical. That's absolutely astronomical. And it's a real minefield, actually, having just gone sort of through this exercise. And again, I thought I knew enough about it. But when you're on, the family side, it's actually quite complex. So, and you're right, and also I think we change as we get older. So my mum developed dementia over a period of time. She changed her view on it. So while we are fully able to communicate with our family about what we want, that's really helpful, because actually, as and when these things start affecting us, we can communicate differently with our family. It's very complex, isn't it? The whole assisted dying, it's very topical, that subject matter. But, if what I communicate to you now actually starts to change because of a medical condition that I have. So in 5 years' time, I'm telling you, I don't want to die, and please don't put me in a care home. You're thinking, oh God, but 5 years ago, I'm pretty sure this isn't what you would have wanted. So it's very complex. And I think the more that we can do, like you say, to communicate with our family, let them know what we think, write things down whilst we've still got the capacity to do so, then that's what we hang on to, isn't it? That's what we trust, because we did know these people, we did know our loved ones, we knew how they felt about it. So even though 10 years down the line they're fighting us against being put in a care home, or we have to do what we think they would have wanted, not to be a burden on us usually, isn't it? I don't want to be a burden. But very complex.
But I also don't want to be put in some awful kind of, because some of them are not very nice.
They are not very nice.
So
I know.
I think I just don't want one.
I've spent my time in some rather sort of really depressing places,
but
there are also some beautiful places.
I know, and I guess if that's and if you have a surplus of funds, maybe it won't. But I mean, they're thousands a month. It's
they are.
The cost is insane.
Sometimes people have quite healthy pension incomes, so actually you're not going to need to dip into the money in the bank necessarily, or have to sell the house to pay for care, because actually you've got this really nice healthy pension income stream. So that will be used to absorb the majority of any costs, and maybe there's a little bit of top up coming out of the bank to meet any shortfall, but okay, that's manageable. So I think all of that should really just be looked at, and again, it might just put everyone's minds at rest. But there are ways in which you can structure your wills to be very protective for future care fee planning. It's very, very common on a first death. A husband or a wife, if they die first, they might leave a trust in their will, which is there to benefit the survivor, the widow, for the rest of her life. But on her death, that trust fund passes those assets down to the children. Now, what this means is that the survivor does not inherit those assets on the first death, which means that if they are to need care later on down the line, and it comes to means testing and filling in the form, they don't own the assets left by the first to die. They only have a right to benefit from them. So actually it's quite an important distinction. They have to declare the income stream. If that money is investments and it's paying out an income stream to the surviving spouse, they have to declare that as part of their means testing, but they don't declare the capital because they don't own the capital. It's a hugely effective way of ensuring that at least half, for argument's sake, is be available for the children later on down the line. But whilst ever mum is still alive, that trust fund is going to support her. So that's a very easy change that people can make in their wills, and if mum and dad like the concept of that and can understand the concept of that, then that's something that people can do very quickly.
And you could do that when you're setting somebody's will up. You could set up a trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The biggest question I get, Arlene, is I get a call from mum or dad saying, I want to sign my house over to the children. And I hate that question. I just hate it, because I know it sounds so simple and so easy. I'm living in my house. If I just sign it over to my daughter, then that will be great, because when it comes to future care, I don't own anything. And really simple in concept, but actually fraught with difficulties in a practical sense. There can be inheritance tax implications of all of that. Also, what if your daughter is married and then ends up getting divorced at some stage? That asset belongs to your daughter, and it's going to become part of any financial settlement conversation in that divorce environment, which is suddenly a nightmare, and the roof over mum's head is at risk then, because maybe half of it might need to be funding this divorce settlement. So it's a really, really difficult question to answer. And I don't mind being asked it. Obviously, I don't mind being asked it, because we're trying to work out why we're doing this. Why are we doing it? Are we doing it to avoid care fees? Are we doing it to save inheritance tax? Because actually, if we're doing it for inheritance tax, it won't work. We give something away, we carry on living in, we give our property away to our daughter, and we carry on living in the property. It's called reserving a benefit. So reserving a benefit in that asset. So HMRC will say, oh, thanks, we're going to tax that as part of your estate in any event. So it doesn't work. So I think it's always trying to work out what the motivation is for whatever it is that we're asking to do.
No, I heard it's not a very tax effective way of doing it, is it?
It isn't, no. And HMRC, if it sounds too good to be true, I do get a lot of feedback from people saying, well, my sister's got this thing set up and there's no tax. And I think, I can't for the life of me work out why there aren't any tax implications. If it sounds too good to be true, it's a good piece of advice, actually, then it may well be. There aren't any quick wins for inheritance tax planning. You've got to think about it very carefully. There are some lower hanging fruit horrible phrase, but there are some lower hanging fruits sometimes, ways in which you can really make an impact on your inheritance tax bill. For example, if you have a life assurance policy and paying out to your estate at the moment, you can write your life assurance policy into trust, which means that it does not pay to your estate, it pays elsewhere. If it pays to your estate, then it's just going to enlarge the value of your estate on which 40% inheritance tax may be paid at some stage. Pay it elsewhere. Very, very simple, simple thing to do. You can ring up your life insurance company and talk to them about writing my life policy into trust, and they will send you a trust deed, with some information about it. So very easy wins on trying to mitigate inheritance tax. And, it's a journey. There are lots of different things that can be done. But again, that's a positive, isn't it? There are lots of ways in which we can mitigate this tax bill, but take advice, do it properly. Don't listen to the man down the pub who's going to tell you to do something with it into some, some sort of scheme. Anything called a scheme should probably be avoided.
Talk to Claire. Any other low-hanging fruit?
Other low-hanging fruit. So gifting, there's some nice rules around inheritance tax gifting that can be should be remembered. So every year we've got a £3,000 annual allowance for gifting purposes. You may have heard of a 7-year rule when it comes to making lifetime gifts. So people often sort of quote me the 7-year rule. If you give something away and you are not reserving a benefit in it, so what we discussed earlier about the house, you give away the house, you carry on living there. There's no gift as far as HMRC are concerned. But if you give something away and to the children, you give them £50,000 after the period of 7 years from you making that gift, then it falls out of account in your estate. Quite a bit of complexity around the gifting rules, but broadly speaking, that's what it looks like. So that can be really effective. But every year we've got a £3,000 allowance where the 7-year rules is irrelevant. It doesn't matter to our £3,000. Now, if we're married, we both have that. So we might both give our children £6,000 in any one tax year. And actually, if this is the first year we're making that gift and we didn't do anything last year, we can pick up last year's allowance as well. So potentially, if we were deciding to do that right here and now, we could give £12,000 right off the bat. It's smaller beer, isn't it? But actually that can be quite efficient. So every tax year, we might just keep shaving away with these gifts. If our children are young, we might put them into accounts for them. There are accounts called Bear Trust accounts where actually at the age of 18, they are entitled to that money. And, come what may, it's there. Sometimes parents whisper quietly about the existence of these accounts to their children. But they are entitled to know about it at 18. But with those sorts of numbers, they can be nice funds, can't they? Perhaps towards a house deposit or a car or a bit of education or something. And it's good ways of shaving the funds down. There are other allowances. If your children get married, you can give them a certain amount of money, which again falls outside the 7 years. There are small gift allowances. So if you want to give things, if you have umpteen grandchildren, you can make these small gifts to each of your grandchildren. So lots of things like that. There's a really nice allowance called a normal expenditure out of income. And there are only certain people who probably sit in this rather comfortable situation. But if you have more money coming in income terms than you spend out every month, so there is a difference, this is what I get, this is what I spend, then you are legitimately able to give away the excess without the 7 years, without any inheritance tax implications, which is great. But it does require consistency. So you need to show the revenue that there was a pattern of that gifting. So it can't just be, I gave away £15,000 one month and then I did nothing for 2.5 years and then I gave away 50,000, it won't, that will look as though it's one-off gifting. Whereas actually, if there's some consistency, it's a monthly thing or it's an annual thing, and there is some intention that I'm going to rely on this normal expenditure out of income allowance, great, that's terrific. We're not dipping into capital, I guess. We're not reducing our estate for inheritance tax purposes, but what we are doing is we're stopping it getting bigger. Because of course, otherwise that excess income is just growing our pot. And if we don't need it, then we could maybe quite efficiently give it away. So little things like that are terrific. It might form part of an overall planning spec for people depending on what their circumstances are.
I mean, we do everything well, not everything. We do so much for our kids. I mean, I think I was interviewing a woman on money. She does money L plates, so she's a lawyer by background as well. And it was just interesting. We were talking about the energy and I guess your philosophy with money. And I think it is. I was talking sex, drugs, rock and roll, and money. We don't talk about it. And it is an energy, it's an exchange, it's a value. And why wouldn't we want to leave something that gives our kids more freedom or a foot up? Because at the end of the day, obviously we have to pay taxes because we need roads, hospitals, and schools, but and we get taxed and taxed and taxed, and then that's taxed. And I'm
Then we
kind of
die and we're taxed again. I know.
exactly. And then if you've saved anything, it goes to a care home, which is why I don't want to go there. I do, we work hard, and I expect my kids to work hard. I don't, we're not in a position to fund their entire lifestyle. Some people can, but they do have to work hard. But at the end of the day, everything's so much more expensive now. If I can help them with anything, I'd love to do that. And I would rather go there than the tax man take more of it.
Yeah, and you're right. We really want to help our kids, and at different stages in their lives, we can do, can't we? When they're early 20s or something, again, they
Yeah,
might be buying property. They might be needing a deposit, and actually that may suit them and it may suit us because we're able to, get something out of our estate and
yeah,
perhaps put it into this house for our kids. We know we're trying to avoid the sex, drugs, risk necessarily because it's in property and it's not in their bank account. And that can be really efficient. It can be efficient for us from an inheritance tax perspective. And guess what? They're on the property ladder, and we feel pleased about it. There's a lot around that actually. Sometimes, do we want to give our kids £50,000 outright for a house deposit? Are we a little bit nervous about that?
yeah,
If they're sort of quite young, they may be buying with a partner. This is a
yeah,
really, really hot topic actually, because these days
yes,
they are all buying property. Not all of us, but a lot of us are buying property in unequal proportions. So if we're in our 20s and we're buying property as boyfriend and girlfriend, it may be that the parents on one side are putting in some capital. That might be us. We're the
yeah,
ones who are giving our child 50 grand to go into this property by way of a house deposit. On the other side, there may not be that same contribution. There might be a
yeah,
couple of £1,000s or some help with the legal fees. Often what people, or a mistake people will make, is that the kids will own that property jointly, and there will be no record of the fact that 50,000
yeah,
came in on one side. And I don't know, again, maybe there's an assumption that will all be worked out. So if we go our separate ways and we sell this property, then you'll take that 50 that came from your mum and dad, and we'll split the rest. If that is not written down, it does not
assume
happen.
nothing.
Oh my goodness. And it's so frustrating. And again, there's no judgment here, because I think there's just an assumption made that everyone will do the right thing. And, guess what? People don't necessarily do the right thing. They'll go for half.
Yeah,
If there is a document written down, it's called a declaration of trust. It's a very straightforward document. Again, it's
yeah,
something that we know all about. You can buy your property and you can have this document that just sits behind the legal title. So you own it legally, the two of you. But
yeah,
this document sort of just sets out what the contributions were and what your agreement is that when that property is sold or on death, what your share is. So actually my share is going to be half of everything, but it's also going to be enhanced by the 50,000 that mum and dad gave me.
yeah,
That might be represented as a percentage of the equity growth. So actually if the equity grows to this, my 50,000 is not 50, it's in a proportionate percentage. All sorts of ways in which we can structure that stuff. And that's so important, isn't it? It's so important. I see people leaving relationships later on in life.
yeah,
So again, this is definitely a midlife sort of situation where they're looking at a 50-50 split, and they know full well that they put £200,000 into this property more than the other partner. It hurts. I mean, it hurts me as an advisor to see that. So it
yeah,
must hurt people at that end. But it's maybe something that people aren't thinking about. Obviously, it's an exciting time. You're buying property together, but if there's one message that I always try and deliver, it's protection. Just protect yourself and
yeah, yeah,
have a conversation with your other half, because they need to be protected as well. It should be a
yeah,
really positive thing. We're not trying to hold money from you, but we just need to be a bit realistic about it,
yeah,
especially if we have children from a previous relationship. We need them to make sure that they're going to benefit from this extra funding that I put in. Or at least if you've had the conversation and agreed that you don't want to separate it, it is going to be 50-50. Great. You had the
yeah,
conversation, and
yeah, yeah,
isn't an easy one. Isn't an easy one. I do accept that,
yeah,
but otherwise, giving money down to the kids. There's timing issues around that. If you've got 3 children and you're going to give 50,000 to one child and the others aren't old enough yet, or they're not in the right time of their lives to be needing any contribution from you, they may not get their 50,000 just yet. But how are you going to deal with that in terms of balancing? So there's little subtleties around that, isn't there? So mum and dad might, if anything happens to mum and dad, child number 1 got 50,000 and the other 2 didn't.
yeah,
But the wills say everything's left a third, a third, a third.
yeah,
So there's just subtleties around talking through those sorts
yeah,
of issues. Again, that's what I hope sets aside maybe someone qualified from the
yeah,
will writers, asking those kind of deeper questions, because more often than not, people have made gifts and they do want them to be taken into
yeah,
account.
yeah,
And for the kids to be treated equally. Otherwise, again, you might have problems later on, or
yeah.
arguments.
And I guess our kids' houses are so much more expensive. So if they're buying a house in their 20s, and if they're lucky enough to be able to buy a house in their 20s, they will probably need to be buying it with somebody else.
People go in as friends now, don't they? It's not just relations,
Yeah.
partners, it's friends who are buying property together.
Yeah.
Even more so, the same principle applies. And
Yeah.
isn't it great to know that these documents exist?
Yes. Yeah.
And
Because
as
if it
parents,
allows you to do that and you're flipping a house, for example, in your mid late 20s, and you can actually get on the housing ladder with a friend, it might actually even be a better idea than
I know, there's so
whoever
many more
you're in
people
love
doing it.
with in
It's
your early
brilliant.
mid 20s, because that might not be who
It
you're
might
in love
last a
with
bit
in your
longer.
yeah.
We've got friends for life, haven't we?
Yes, we
Sometimes the
do.
partners come and go.
To pick a girlfriend, I think I'm gonna tell them.
But
Oh,
it's
it's
good to know as
interesting.
parents who are planning for this stuff, and trying to help out the kids, but having some reservations about maybe necessarily
Yeah.
handing things over. We want as parents for our kids to make sure they're protected. So I'm going to give you this 50,000, but you have to make sure you've got your documents in place if you're going to live with someone, as in a partner relationship
Mhm.
sense. Then you might think about a cohabitee agreement,
Yeah.
which is sort of a living together agreement. That's what they're
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes known as. So if we go our separate ways, we just want to write down a document that says, here's what we're agreeing should happen to this big pot of assets that we both own. That can morph into a prenuptial agreement
Yeah.
sometimes. So you can
Yeah.
take that agreement if you decide to get married 5 years down the line. That agreement, because you worked very hard at getting that in place, you might just tweak it a little bit, and it can then accommodate, your spouse relationship. And prenups are, I think they're a great idea. It's a
Yeah.
really hard conversation to have. I know that, but it's quite common actually, especially for parents.
Yeah.
Parents are often sort of pushing the kids into conversations about prenups to protect themselves, but that's
Yeah.
because they're pushing gifts down, or
Yeah.
because they've got big inheritance amounts that are going to land back down with the children. So they're saying, look, please just make sure you're protected. Write your
Yeah.
will. Maybe think about a prenup. If you're just living together, maybe have some sort of agreement. Definitely have a declaration of trust over property. And there are lots of things that can be done as a family, to get
Yeah.
being protected.
It's interesting. I think you were talking about it actually, because sometimes when a prenup is set, then either, maybe the man starts earning more in the relationship or the woman starts earning more in the relationship. So it's also about updating these prenups.
You can have a postnup. I don't know if anyone knows this. So the prenups, I think, are a bit more powerful because
Yeah.
by the time you're looking at a postnup, the leverage is, I mean, to be crude about it, the leverage is kind of, loosened off, hasn't it? Because you're already married. So
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
you can propose a postnup, but is your other half going to say yes to it because
Yeah.
you're married now? So arguably it's a little late, but you're
Yeah.
quite right. You can review these things, and I just think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to
Yeah.
discuss, but I'm very conscious it's sensitive. It can be such a sensitive subject, especially if it's pushed down from mum and dad.
Yeah.
But I think the theme is just, let's just make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
This is going to be good for you as it is for us, because we all understand what the situation is, but it's
Yeah.
not very romantic, is it?
No, but I think they're uncomfortable conversations, and sometimes those are the ones that we have to have. And actually, after you have the conversation, you usually come out of it and think, "Gosh, that wasn't actually that bad."
You should feel better. And there's some certainty there, isn't there? I
Yeah.
know that I'm going to be looked after. If I'm the one that doesn't necessarily have the family money here, at least I know, because we've talked about it, that I'm going to be looked after in the event that we go our separate ways. And,
Yeah.
that should be reassuring. Maybe we don't all think that way, but I
Yeah.
would like to think that it's a positive conversation as a family.
Yeah. And we joke about it too. I think the kids are very. I think they're kind of in the know that I do not want to age badly, and if I do, I really don't. They know that. I
Yeah.
don't, and it's fine. I don't. So we joke about it. I'm like, just a little nudge off the cliff, and I just you
Little
have to
nudge.
make light of the situation, because at some point we are going to be old.
Absolutely. I had a conversation with my daughter the other day where I said, if I get hit by a car or a bus, just please know that was great by me, because it's quick, it's fast, I'm gone. And she was sort of looking at me in horror. And I said, no, no, this is a healthy thing that we're talking
Yeah.
about here. Just know if it's quick, I'm happy
Yeah.
with that, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to be wasting away in a hospital bed.
No.
It's devastating and tragic, and almost all of us probably would be sitting here thinking we don't want that
Yeah.
either.
No, my dad had dementia, and he's 13. He was 13 years older than my mom. And yeah, it was awful. I've got two sisters, and there's 8 grandkids combined amongst all of us. And he didn't know whose children belonged to who anymore. And he was a shell of a man. And, it's really awful to watch. I don't want my kids to. you know.
I don't either. And having been
Yeah.
through it with my mum, she
Yeah.
still recognizes us, but there'll be a point where she doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's an
I know that
awful,
she
awful
she would
disease. It's
hate it, Arlene.
horrendous.
She
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
absolutely hate it, but she doesn't aware. She's not, sorry,
Yeah.
she's not aware of it now. But I
Yeah.
know that she would hate it.
Yeah.
And again, that's where the complexity comes in.
Yeah.
What do our family do?
Yeah.
There's only so much that they can do. But I mean,
And I,
things are changing so quickly in that space, aren't they? In terms
yeah.
of decisions that we might be able to make for ourselves.
Yeah.
But
And I guess that's why we laugh about it now, because maybe it is still a bit uncomfortable because I still feel quite young. Right? But you never know.
I know when you turn a certain age, and you don't feel that age at all, do you? It's just that you
No.
start seeing everyone around you who's still looking, young. They're
It's
getting
when
old.
it's I had to fill something in, you had to put your birth date in. I'm like, geez, like,
How can
when you
that
keep
be?
scrolling, it's like, where's my
To
birth date
find the
here?
1970 something. Yeah, that's really
Oh my
depressing.
gosh, I'm having to scroll further and further now, but
I know you read my lovely bio. Thank you so much. But 25 years experience, and I think, how can that be? How can I have been doing
yeah,
this for 25 years? Because you still feel like
I
the
know.
sort of
And I guess
junior
that's the
sometimes.
beauty of feeling good though, isn't it? And
It
I guess
is young at heart.
the yeah, and the networking event, it was about, it was wealth and wellness, and it was, it is about, the money that we earn and we put away. We also want to enjoy it till we're a nice ripe age,
That
healthy.
was a wonderful event that we shared together, and
Yeah,
I love
it
it
was
because
great.
it combined, some quite gritty subject matter
Yeah,
like the legal,
yeah,
the financial, the getting your affairs in order with
yeah,
the getting yourself in order. And
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
just love that. And I think there's such an audience for that these days. We are accomplished women, we're intelligent women, we're often in charge of our own businesses with our
hmm
own financial control. And we want to be fit and well and healthy. And you think
yeah,
actually that's a juggle, isn't it? We know
yeah,
running your own business and trying to achieve all of those things is a real juggle. And I think these networks of women coming together to talk about it and
yeah,
support each other and say, actually, it's not just you, we're not
yeah.
all smashing it. We
No, no,
we all struggle quite a bit with these conversations. And actually, this is a hard financial business related decision I'm trying to make. How do I get help with this? I don't
yeah,
want to have to ask, you know, ask for help necessarily from a
yeah,
group of men
exactly.
who might judge me or tell me what to do with my business or mansplain it to me.
Yeah,
I would really like a network where I can get some support on this. And I love the fact that there are so many female based, business networks cropping up. But yeah, that subject matter is great. The combination of
yeah.
those things.
But it's interesting, there's food, there's menopause, there's hormones, there's everything. It's like all this, the
And
whole
there was
kit.
Grant Lee Hall,
And
which
it
is,
was, yeah. Couldn't
perfect.
have picked a better spot.
Couldn't have picked.
Quickly, obviously, this current Labour government, can you just touch briefly on how that's going to impact us?
Yeah, so the Labour government have always been keen on the taxation of the wealthier part of
Mm,
society to fund, the less wealthy part of society. So it's no change, sorry, it's no surprise that we're going to see some changes. We have already seen some changes. So
yeah,
there's some really high profile stuff, isn't there, with the farmers?
yeah,
Lots of protests in London because they are now being brought significantly within the inheritance tax bracket,
yeah,
having previously been completely out of it. And without getting too political about it, the farmers provide the food. They are given this allowance. I've heard it called a loophole. Somebody online, dreadful social media, where somebody said, well, it's about time this loophole was closed. And I couldn't help myself, just reply to say,
yeah,
this isn't a loophole. This is just a generational allowance for farmers to
yeah,
recognize the fact that we want them to be able to continue farming. We want there
yeah.
to be succession in that environment. So, we're going to enable you to not have to suffer a burden of 40% tax, which probably means you're going to have to sell the farm, and
Well,
then
I
the whole
think
farming
that's the
operation
I
stops.
think that's what people don't understand. And my dad comes from a farming background, so he's Dutch. They had a dairy farm on the in the Dutch border to Germany. And like he tells his stories. I mean, there were 12 kids and they worked. And I guess a lot of, they worked their backsides off. I mean, these people, they work 7 days a week and they provide good, healthy, local produce to us. This gets my knickers in a twist,
Yeah.
really, because if they were to pay 40%, I mean, they, like you say, they will have to sell the farm because a lot of them are asset rich and
And that's
cash,
the farm's
not
gone.
cash poor, but I mean, a lot of them do not. I mean, who works 12 months to get one paycheck? That's how a lot of these farms are run. And I mean, I don't think anyone in that cabinet comes from a
Yeah, has
farming
any
background,
real
and
understanding, I know.
otherwise they'd be shouting out. So Yeah,
I agree. And there's some great stuff. There's some great content on social media. And, like or hate Jeremy Clarkson, if you watch that program that he made, the insight into what the
yeah,
life in a farming environment is like is phenomenal. There's a
yeah.
lot of learning to be had because you sit there thinking, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Like
There
this
can be
blueberry picker. You remember that little? I love Jeremy Clarkson.
actor as well. And he tells it how it is, and he's been
Yeah,
very, I mean, the profit margin after there was one episode where he said, so for 12 months of hard work, this is what
yeah,
the net profit is, and it was staggering. And I know there's a little bit of effect for
yeah.
camera, but I think that's what the reality is.
But did you
It's
watch the
devastating.
episode when he was trying to grow some mushrooms and the whole thing was just,
Oh,
I mean, there's a local farmer opening, you might know actually about this, but they're opening paddle courts in one of their sheds to make
oh,
money. And I
really?
thought, good on you, but to have to diversify to paddle
Right.
courts to make
Yeah.
ends meet it's crazy. It's
Diversification has been on the cards for
yeah,
farmers
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
agricultural families for quite a long
yeah,
time, I think. So, solar fields and things like that, and you do think, well, good on you. It's very sad that you're having to do this, but actually fantastic that you're sitting down and trying to think about ways in which we can
yeah,
we can, monetize sort of areas of the land, wedding venues and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. But
Funds
when
for
you're having to put solar panels on farmland versus big warehouses, I mean, every single house should have solar panels. Every
yeah.
new build should have solar panels. You don't put them on fields that grow our crops. It's
I think for anyone who
crazy.
doesn't know enough about this, have a look on social media, find some content because there are some brilliant younger farmers actually, and females, women in
Yeah,
their 30s who are saying, I just want to talk you through what the impact of these changes is going to be so that you
yeah, yeah,
know. I saw this great woman recently and she talked about the 10 local businesses that she would not be able to contribute to this year
yeah,
because she cannot afford to spend the money that she did have lined up for those local businesses. So
yeah,
someone coming and fixing some fencing, bigger
yeah,
jobs, quite
yeah,
substantially bigger jobs, because she's having to use that money to pay legal fees or to start a fund for
yeah,
life assurance to try and help combat the inheritance tax problem when
yeah,
they die. So that was really sad, but there's a lot of education out there, and I think people can
yeah,
just get on board with that and have a look. I mean, the government have also come after businesses in their last budget. So there are reliefs which are now being restricted that were
mhm,
previously very generous that are now going to be less generous. I think as time goes on, we may see some tightening up of the allowances. So at the moment, there is a global inheritance tax of 1 million, very broadly speaking, as between a husband and wife. So by the time of the second death, there is a £1 million allowance, depending on gifts that you might have made and
mhm,
assets that you own. But everything over and above that will be taxed at 40%. Will
mhm,
that change? Will we see any changes? This is the Labour government who are probably minded
yeah,
to look at that and generate more tax from the wealthier families. So
yeah,
we're seeing, I can't remember what the statistic is, but the amount of millionaires who are leaving the country is immense. And I know we're not all going to feel sorry for the millionaires, but actually they're the ones who are
yeah,
paying into the tax system by living here and
yeah,
maintaining their businesses here. That's how, the
yeah.
country is funded, substantially. So losing them by this sort of backdoor
Yeah.
taxation is not
Well, it's
healthy.
12,000 millionaires had left a few weeks ago, so I'm sure it's more now.
You hear people ringing up the radio station saying, I've just decided I'm going to shut my business down and I'm
Yeah,
going, because
yeah,
the impact of the business taxation as well, the national insurance changes, I'm seeing it locally. You're probably seeing it locally as well. The business
yeah,
is just closing. And I don't know what the answer is. It's a very, here are the keys to the country, go and run it. It's very difficult, isn't it? But certainly from those of us who have some assets and find ourselves in the sort of wealthier end of the bracket, we've got to work quite hard to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and our assets
yeah,
and for the benefit of the family and being as tax efficient as we can. And there are ways to do it. So,
yeah,
it's not a completely gloomy story, but I think there may be more changes ahead.
yeah. Yeah, it's you can ask I asked my 10-year-old, I said, if you taxed the wealthy, what do you think would happen? He goes, they'd leave. I'm like, there you have it.
I
It's
know.
happened over and over. I mean, history repeats itself. It just doesn't work. And I
And
mean,
there's got to be a balance, hasn't there? We need to
yeah,
incentivize businesses to come here.
yeah,
But when you see the really bigger businesses, was it Dyson? I think
yeah,
Dyson, didn't it? I used to live down near Swindon in the
yeah,
Cotswolds, and Dyson had this fantastic factory. And whenever you drove past, you thought, God, it's massive. It's like one of those big sort of Amazon warehouses, but it's huge.
yeah,
And I left, and you think, wow, the employment opportunity
exactly.
areas just dried up overnight because
Yeah,
Dyson felt that he had no choice but to move his business, overseas because of the taxation regime.
yeah,
I mean, I don't confess to know all about the detail of that, but
yeah, yeah.
when you watch it and you see the business leaving, you think this is just not right. Surely it should be, we need it to be attracting the business and not
Yeah,
sending it
exactly.
away.
Yeah, it's the national insurance coming in as well. Like if you're an employee heavy business right now, which I'm not, and neither are you? So, thank goodness. But I mean, if
Yeah,
you are, it's going to hurt in April.
it really is going to hurt.
Yeah,
And, again, seeing people closing their doors now,
yeah,
rather than even trying to manage and see how it goes, suck it and see for 12 months, they're just closing their businesses now
yeah,
in advance. And that's just so, so sad, isn't it? Because, we all buy we all buy quite a bit off Amazon, I'm sure, but I've
yeah.
been trying really hard recently to support local businesses. I've got this
Yes, I know, me too.
quite expensive greengrocers in town. I will really try and go there.
Yeah, yeah,
I've got a coffee shop that just opened, and I will go in as much as I can. Poor me,
yeah, yeah,
but I'll go in as much as I can just to get a coffee or a cake or
yeah.
something, just because I want to show support and go cross the threshold and show them that we are shopping on the high street.
Absolutely. And I guess that's something we can all do is just support local business but
Yeah.
Amazon, I mean, they are just so easy, aren't they? But I do try, like every Christmas, I really try really hard not to use it.
20th of December, it can get a bit active. It's a
Yeah.
bit of a, I know, it's good for certain things, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
great.
yeah. It's great for World Book Day.
Yeah.
It was very good. It was Tuesday, and I thought it's beginning of March. World Book Day must be coming up. And I thought, oh shoot, is this Thursday? So we were
That you've
driving
had
back
it.
from football, and I said to my son, and said, he goes, "Oh, I'll just Google 50 last minute World Book Days costumes." So he went as Mr. Bump. So we went on Amazon right there and just bought some gauze, and
Wow. Yeah.
there you have
And
it. And it was there. I said it'll be here tomorrow, Wednesday, and they were sorted for Thursday.
we are busy working mums, and whilst in our heads we want to be those mums who 2 weeks before have started
Yeah,
working on the
that's
Mr. Bump
not me.
outfit,
I would love to be that
actually.
woman, but I've never been that woman. So
I've never been. The best advice I ever had from somebody, she said, she looked me square in the eye and she said, "Don't be so hard on yourself." And it reduced me to tears. I think she said it 3 times. Don't be so hard on yourself. And I think I was just bawling because I thought, I'm so hard on myself, professionally,
yeah, yeah,
personally, mummy duties, the guilt of all of that, and actually it's so unfair,
yeah.
isn't it? Doing great, we are
Perfectionist
doing really
trauma
well.
coming out.
It is, isn't it? But that's the high standards we set for ourselves, I think, isn't it? Which isn't a
Absolutely.
bad thing, but
No, it's not. So what would you anyone who doesn't have a will or who's gotten from one from W.H. Smith, which I would Claire will kind of look at that and put the commas in the right place.
yeah.
Um I guess just give you a shout, hey?
Yeah, just have a chat. I never charge for initial appointments. People
Okay.
always ring up saying, "How much will it cost to have a chat with you?"
Yeah.
And I think, "Oh God, I don't know anything about you yet, or
Yeah, okay.
what you might be interested in doing." So, and also, I'm a people person.
Yeah.
I like speaking to people. So it's a pleasurable part of my job. So I'll always have an initial conversation with people just
Okay.
to try and work out what's what. And
Yeah.
inevitably, there's a bunch of things that come out. There's mum and dad. There's some stuff going on in the
Yeah.
family. So we can have a chat about all of that. And then often I will just send people a bit of a summary saying, "Look, here's a
Yeah.
list we spoke about. Here are some things that you might think about doing. If you would like me to help you, I'd be happy to help you. If
Yeah.
not, that's great. I hope it's been useful for you, because I think sharing information with people, being a bit generous with your time is a good thing to do, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yeah, if
It is.
anyone just has questions or wants to explore it, has been frightened about doing it in the past, or there's been a reason why they just didn't feel comfortable in asking,
Yeah.
again, there's no judgment.
I guess one quick question before we stop is you mentioned it a little bit at the networking event. Like what happens if you don't have a will and you die? I mean,
Yeah.
it's messy, isn't it? I mean, one, you've lost obviously you're grieving, you've lost somebody I think that you love, and then all of a sudden there's no will or it's a messy will.
Yeah,
What
suddenly you've got this
happens?
whole
Who
other
takes
concern,
care of it?
haven't you?
Yeah.
So there are rules called the intestacy rules, which dictate what happens in the event that you die without leaving a will. So you are known as dying intestate. And the intestacy rules will look at what family members you left behind you. So did you leave a spouse? That's quite important. If you did leave a spouse, did you also leave children? That's also quite important because it maybe there's some sort of sharing of the assets between the spouse and the children, which, I think often people will just assume, well, if I'm the widow or the widower, I'm just going to get everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works like that, but sometimes it doesn't actually. And it depends on what assets you left and how they're owned. So if you owned everything jointly, then yes, okay, the surviving spouse is probably going to inherit everything. But if you had assets in your own right, maybe someone had a business business. There were a couple of investment properties around the place, some investments in the bank, stocks and shares. If they were held in sole names, a lot of those, then actually it isn't the case that the survivor is just going to inherit those. There's a certain amount that the survivor gets outright, and then the rest is split between the survivor and the kids. So if the kids are young, when they reach 18, they're getting that. And yeah, it can be really, really messy. So the intestacy rules are just best avoided. If you have no spouse, you have no children, then actually it reaches up to parents as the next stop. Then it reaches sideways to siblings. And sometimes we all don't necessarily want our siblings to benefit. We're very different people often, aren't we, as siblings? If we have no siblings, then it will find the next sort of living relative, very generally speaking. If we don't have any easily available, then actually it traces back. So you'll have seen that. I don't know if you've ever seen that program, Air Hunters, where these genealogists will go around sort of tracing family up sideways, and they produce these incredible family trees. And it could be that long lost distant relatives you didn't even know you had, they're going to be the ones who benefit. I mean, that's a bit extreme if you don't have immediate family, but it's actually quite fascinating. But we don't want to leave it to chance as to who benefits. Take control, do it yourself. But it's fascinating, the intestacy rules. So yeah, statutory rules, that's what's going to dictate if you have no.
Okay. And we don't want that, so we're all going to call Claire.
No, we don't. If you want the donkey sanctuary to get everything, then you should make a will leaving everything. We're very wealthy, I think.
I'm not sure what the kids would think of that, actually. I might flip that one past them tonight.
They love donkeys.
Not that much.
Not that much.
Well, thank you so much. So we will put all of Claire's contact details. Please give her a call. At least it's a complimentary phone call, from what I understand. And I guess the more expensive your wealth and your assets and things, obviously that becomes more complex and a bigger job. But just have the conversation, because I have I will be calling you.
Thank you so much for letting me come on your podcast. It's my first
one. It's
been
really interesting. Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I love doing them, actually. I'm really enjoying them. And I think this is, like, we often talk about, like, I've had menopause experts and fasting and all sorts of other things. But when I met you and heard you, I just thought, this is such an important conversation that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know it's a bit heavy going, but yeah, it is fascinating. Thank you for letting me share it.
But it doesn't have to be heavy, I think. You bring a lot of lightness to it. And I think that's really important for something that is quite a heavy topic. I think, maybe we just need to reframe the whole thing about death and dying, and it's inevitable. And I guess, having things lined up so there's as little stress left for our children and our spouse if
absolutely right
to happen. So on that happy note, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you. It's been great.